educational stuff in countries that don't have very many educational opportunities. And we also do like community development. So we do humanitarian aid work, come in, do wells for people, fresh water, stuff like that. And so I kind of oversee teams that are located between Turkey and Afghanistan, so kind of all the STAN countries. And my wife and I lived over there for about 20 years and been back here for a decade, kind of overseeing multiple projects. So that's kind of what I do. And I got connected with your professor through, there was some Egyptian exchange students that came a couple summers ago. And so I got the chance to do some kind of personal leadership development class with them, and still keep in contact with them, coaching one guy actually who's kind of a business startup guy in Cairo right now.
Yeah. Well, you know, that sounds like very gratifying work, Dan. You must enjoy that. You know, I think you know, listening to that, I don't know. Yeah, I'm excited to sort of hear about, you know, what that looks like or what that does for you.
Well, it's interesting you guys started talking about paradigms. You know, this morning I was on a phone. So the news is bigger than America. And turns out the Taliban is taking back over Afghanistan. Oh, yeah. So we have 3 families in Afghanistan. So I was on the phone all morning trying to figure out how to get our families out of Afghanistan. And so I was on one of the guys I coach, kind of a life coach for, is the consulate general for Afghanistan that lives in Beverly Hills, and he's an Afghan guy. And so I was on with him trying to figure out what we should do and whatnot. And he was, you know, saying, you're like the only guy that I can talk about with this stuff. I step out my door, you know, and I'm talking with my neighbors in Beverly Hills about, you know, where they're getting their pedicure today, and you know, what's the latest stroller they bought for their dog and stuff like that. And so just kind of like these, you know, living in a totally different paradigm. And I think that's probably the best thing about my job, is it keeps life real, you know. So as soon as I get done, you know, caught up in, oh, what's the next mountain bike I should buy, you know, then I get to go travel over and see what the rest of the world deals with. And so kind of keeps life real a little bit.
Yeah, it gives you an appreciation. So Dan, maybe, like, you know, you have a very interesting and sounds like very gratifying job. Can you tell us a little bit about your education career journey? How do you get to this place?
Yeah, so I graduated from Colorado State University, one of the top 2,500 schools in the nation, in math. And then during my time at the university, I was able to travel overseas quite a bit and worked at the US Embassy in Moscow for a little bit. And so after I got married, I moved overseas with my wife. And during that time, you know, we kind of started some nonprofit organizations overseas, and then that really started to grow. And so I was leading like a team of 10 people, and that turned into 5 teams of 10 people. And I realized I don't know anything about leadership. So I went to Azusa Pacific and got a master's in organizational leadership through them, that I was able to do mostly correspondence while living overseas. And so that's kind of where I started getting introduced into 7 Habits a little bit, even though a lot of it I was trying to apply before that. And then we moved so we used to live in Kyrgyzstan, which is right above Afghanistan, for about 10 years. Then we moved to Azerbaijan, which is right above Iran, for another 5 years. And in Azerbaijan, we were doing business development, and Azerbaijan is the second most corrupt country in the world. So we were trying to run, you know, non-corrupt countries in this incredibly corrupt environment. So I decided to get a doctorate in theology of work, like what God thinks about work, and what's good work and what's bad work, and things like that. And so that's what my doctorate's in. And so that was kind of my educational journey. It was more out of necessity than any kind of, I don't need a title. I just need to figure out how to work life.
Yeah. So Dan, how were you first exposed to Seven Habits?
So I think when I started doing my master's program, one of the books was Seven Habits, and then I immediately started running leadership seminars in Kyrgyzstan for kind of graduating students that were going into like young entrepreneurs that wanted to start their own businesses and things like that. So I found, the principles super transferable and useful in pretty much any context. And I would say out of the hundreds of leadership books I've read, it would still be my go-to. Like if there was a person entering into leadership studies, I would say this is the first book you need to read.
And that was one of the points I was making in one of the previous classes for the students was, you read the Seven Habits stuff and then you read, and we're going to learn about some of the other leadership models that are out there. And, this stuff is embedded, in a lot of those leaders. So a lot of those sort of more modern leadership models, there's really some foundational Seven Habits stuff in those models, right? That you can see and tease out.
Yeah.
So how do you apply Seven Habits in your job? You got this, wonderful sort of worldwide teams. There's people and, all these different sort of elements. It seems like Seven Habits would be, not only go-to in something you teach other people, but also a go-to in things that you have to use yourself.
Yeah, and I was thinking about that, as you guys are discussing paradigms and stuff, I'm realizing, okay, I'm kind of at the front end. So some of the things I may talk about, you haven't read yet or haven't gone through yet. So maybe the easiest way I could explain it is I once heard a podcast where a guy described leadership kind of like a clock. So let's just take an example of, working at McDonald's. So the guy that works at McDonald's is like the second hand on the clock. And all he cares about is, what do I got to do today? And maybe if he's super proactive, he's thinking, what I got to do this week to, manage my weekly schedule and get to work on time and leave work on time and finish all the other things I need to do. So your team worker, your line worker is like the second hand on a clock. And then the leader, the manager of McDonald's is like the minute hand on the clock. And so he's thinking, okay, how do I schedule these workers for the next 2 weeks or the next month? What do I need to order for my store over the next 6 months? And so the line worker is like the second hand. He's thinking about today and maybe this week. The manager is like the minute hand. He's thinking about, this month and the next 6 months. And kind of the guy that owns 50 McDonald's is like the hour hand and he's thinking about this year and the next 5 years. Right. He's thinking, where do I expand in the next 5 years? And how many people do I need to hire on to keep things moving and growing and things like that. So I found over the past decade, I'm like the hour hand guy. So my whole life is proactivity. Like nobody's telling me what to do, which is a great thing and a bad thing. So I wake, every Sunday night, I'm having to sit with, Stephen Covey's little weekly organizer chart and say, what are my primary goals for this week? What are my roles that I need to fulfill? Where can I fit into my week the stuff that's important? Because almost nothing in my life is urgent. Every once in a while something urgent will pop up and I don't have to plan that because it's already planned for me. So the only thing I need to plan is the non-urgent stuff, like where are we going in the next 5 years? Who do I need to contact and what phone calls do I need to make to think about, okay, I got to start building a relationship with this guy so that a year from now we can maybe call on him to fit into a need that we're going to have a year from now. So the higher you move up in an organization, I think the more important proactivity gets because more and more of your life is all depending on accomplishing things that nobody's going to tell you to do. You just got to think of them and initiate and make it happen. And that's kind of how, leaders run organizations.
Yeah. Well, it occurs to me too that, even if one of the points is that, we all have that sort of clock, paradigm, is sort of embedded in us, right? So even that worker on the front line, he's got to do that day-to-day stuff, but he's got a minute hand, and he's got his personal, or she's got her personal hour hand. And if we all had that sort of mentality in our own personal lives, that would be an effective way to maybe express personal leadership, right?
Yeah.
Make sure we have that. Very cool.
And maybe more on a personal note, I was just thinking about this before I got on, because you guys are all kind of the age of my kids. So I have 3 kids that are in college right now. One's just out of college. One's at Cal Poly. And one of the habits you'll run into down the road is seek to understand and then be understood. So I'll just tell you some about my parenting failures. So as my kids were in high school, they started deviating from the perfect plan I had for their life. And I remember sitting with my son at one point, and he had just blown it, in my opinion. And I was like, "What are you thinking?" And I realized I didn't really care what he was thinking. My term, "What are you thinking?" was just code for "you're an idiot." And kind of the response over the next several years was, don't share anything with Dad, because he'll express,
you're going to judge him, right?
He'll express you're an idiot.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, what if I would have used the exact same words and said, "Hey, tell me what you were thinking in this situation," and actually sought to understand kind of what he was thinking as he did what he did, and really genuinely wanted to understand him.
Right. Or in the words that the students are sort of learning, like what is your paradigm, right?
Yeah.
Or what his paradigm was. So.
And my guess is over the following years, he would have been much more willing to come and say, "Hey, I did this and I'm not feeling too great about it. What do you think about it?" Rather than try and hide it from me, and, because I'm going to call him an idiot. So again, we're talking like, oh, these are leadership principles, but these are life principles that they kind of overflow into every aspect of life. Yeah. And so I think through the years, I've learned to ask, "Hey, tell me what you're thinking on this situation," rather than, "What are you thinking?"
And another thing about that too, Dan, it's not that hard to do, really, right? You have to sort of, there's that, and we're going to talk more about that stimulus response sort of model, right? Your response as a parent, you love this kid or this person, and but you think they're crazy, and that's the, your sort of natural, stimulus response. But you got to say, "Hey, I'm gonna pause for a second, and I'm really gonna try to find out, maybe what's going on in their head, right? And what's their paradigm is a more effective way to do it." And it's hard, but it's really not that hard, right? So.
And I think, I'm getting older, and I can now get a discount at McDonald's, so that's a plus. But I would say some people grow older and don't grow any wiser. And the people that continue to grow wiser are the people that are able to push the pause button between stimulus and response. And if you haven't read that part yet, it's good, so you'll read it later. Yeah. But when stuff,
I think they've all read about habit 1. We just haven't talked about it yet.
Yeah. So if you can keep for the next 70 years pushing the pause button between stimulus and response, you are going to be a great person, a great parent, a great grandparent. You're going to be awesome, because you'll keep growing, and you'll grow in your self-awareness, like, "Oh, why does that trigger me? Why am I getting upset about that?" And if you could push the pause button enough to kind of hold your tongue before letting it all out and say, "Oh, this is bugging me because I struggle with this myself. Yeah. And so maybe I should respond this way." yeah, you're going to end up being a whole lot better person if you can figure out how to push the pause button.
Yeah. So I want to encourage the students to get some questions in, for Dan. This is your opportunity to find out a little bit about how this works, and maybe more particularly about Dan and his career and how he makes this stuff happen. So let's see, Cole, help us out here. Thank you for asking a question.
Yeah. I was just wondering if maybe you could talk more about your experience at the U.S. Embassy and kind of how you carried out your leadership expertise overseas. I think you said Moscow, if that's right.
Yeah. So I think I was 20 years old at the time, so I didn't have much leadership expertise. But it was I was a learner, and I think being a lifelong learner is a great element of leadership. So I think part of growing as a leader is going back to this paradigm thing. So I don't know if this directly, I know it doesn't answer your question because I'm having a hard time answering your question, but I was watching this Netflix documentary on this little girl in India the other day that was born with hydroencephalitis, or her head was huge, and they were doing all this stuff to try and save her, whatever. And at one point, the mom in the video says, I was so glad when my daughter was born, because having a daughter means I would have somebody to help understand my suffering. And I just thought, that is such a different view on life, that the reason for having kids would be somebody can share in my understanding of how much suffering I have to go through in this lifetime. And I just thought, part of leadership and growing as a person is to be able to take in other people's worldviews and to synthesize them with your own and recognize my world isn't the only world out there. And so I think just going overseas, that summer in Moscow when I spent, this was before the Soviet Union fell apart. So we'd go to a grocery store, and the only thing in the grocery store was canned seaweed. And I thought, how am I going to survive? How am I going to make it through 8 weeks of eating canned seaweed? And so just kind of, I remember driving by, a mile-long line for toilet paper when I was in Moscow. And it just kind of gives you a different perspective on what am I really living for? Like, what's really important in life? So.
Well, I'd point out too, Dan, that, these students, they just went through a year-long pandemic, right? Which is something we never got in our 20s, or, and the world had sort of never seen before. So I think it's a good time to reflect and sort of maybe understand a little bit about what that experience is means to you now, and is going to mean to you, moving forward, right? That the world is not always the mountain bike buying consumption place that we make it out to be as Americans, right?
Yeah.
Let's see. So Louis, you had your hand up. Could you go ahead and ask your question?
Hey, yeah. Dan, I know that you said that when you were studying work theology, there's a lot of transferable ideas about 7 habits, but specifically, I was wondering what your biggest takeaway was from like teaching it in the leadership classes and just getting a better and more in-depth overview of it.
Yeah. So I think here's my takeaway from 4 years of study, that I think in the US, we put too much weight on work, and work can't bear the weight. We expect work to be our self-fulfillment, our self-actualization tool, and the thing that's going to bring meaning and purpose and all that stuff into our life. I think work is a neutral medium. So it's like an empty plate that you need to create and use as an instrument to live out your purpose. So you need purpose going into it, and your work is a tool to live out that purpose. But if you don't have your own purpose going into the work, it could be a burden, or it could be great, or whatever, but don't expect the work itself to create your purpose for you. So your work is not creating your self-actualization. Your work is a tool for you to live out your purpose that you bring into it. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
And that's a great lead into to what you're gonna have to read this week, is the, habit 2 with begin with the end in mind, right? And there's a big sort of focus on discovering your purpose, and we'll go through some exercises to try to make that happen too.
Yes.
Other questions for Dan? Anybody else?
Yeah, I was just thinking, like, do you have any specific tips on how you can sort of deal with the stimulus response cycle and put that on pause? Like, are there any habits or any things that you go through in your head to try to mitigate that response?
So I would say I'm continuing to grow in it. And it's easier with strangers than it is with people that are really close to you. So I'll just tell you that. Somebody on the street calls you an idiot, and it's like, why are they calling me an idiot? What did I just do? Did I just cut them off in traffic or whatever? And it's kind of this calm inner conversation and things like that. Which, yeah, I probably did. Maybe I am an idiot. When your wife calls you an idiot, then it's all, what? You're an idiot. Kind of like that pause button somehow disappears. And so I think something I've been doing lately is I have this little emotions chart on my phone. And I kind of, I think psychologists call it when you become activated, which means like my pulse just went up a little bit and my heart's beating a little bit faster, and I'm feeling like a little bit tense and stuff. It's called being activated. When you're activated, to try and recognize that and identify what feelings am I having. And I'm not a feeling guy, so I need a chart to tell me what feelings I'm feeling at the time, And so I'm like, oh, I just felt totally dismissed. And I would never come up with the word dismissed on my own because my emotional vocabulary isn't that rich. But I think when this person said that, I just felt dismissed. And then I'm able to pause and say, I'm an okay person. Whether I'm dismissed or not, I'm pretty okay. I'm satisfied with who I am. I'm a growing person. I've made some mistakes, but I'm 85% good. That's like a solid B. I can live.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, Dan, I'm gonna. We got a lot of stuff to cover tonight, and this was a great sort of lead in. So all the things Dan's talking about, the kinds of life experiences, the insights and things, that is all available to everybody in this class. And Dan, I think you helped us out by providing a good example and a good start. Dan, so you got these students, they're just starting out on their life journeys and whatnot, and just starting to learn the 7 habits. Is there any kind of, piece of advice or things that you could give them as sort of a way to wrap up this little celebrity interview here?
So I do think you're kind of going into, your professor already mentioned, you're going into the mission statement piece. Don't rush through that. I still have a mission statement that I update every 10 years, and I try and live by it and make decisions by it. Because at my funeral, I really do want people to say certain things about me, and even before my funeral, ideally. But having a picture of really what you're shooting for, because everybody's going to try and sell you something throughout life and have you do what their mission is for your life. And if you don't have a solid mission for your own life, you're not going to accomplish the things that you really want to in your own life. So don't let somebody else write your mission statement. Write your own and live on purpose.
Oh, Dan, that's great advice. Thank you for that. And so Dan, we're gonna let you go. In order to wrap up this video. I'm going to put on gallery view. If everybody could, give Dan a little thank you Zoom wave. And Dan, we appreciate you doing this. You've been a good go-to guy for me coming back and being a celebrity interview multiple times, and I'm definitely going to ask you again. So thank you for being here, and thank you on behalf of the students too.